also want to take this opportunity, as this is a launch of a book, to thank many people who made this book kind of happen. Of course, I will start with my daughters, Ritika and Angelika, my family, my parents, my sisters, and to His Majesty. As you might have noticed at the forward for both the books, the Serene Strength and Leading Out were written by His Majesty, the King of Bhutan. And he has really been, in many ways, the wind beneath my wings to make this whole thing happen. So this would not have happened without him. All the various people that you talked about, the many people where I worked in Tihar jail with the prisoners there after the tsunami, where Ritinjali worked with looking and thinking of schooling and education beyond the four walls of a school. So those are the kind of things that you were talking about that made me happen. And of course, in those 30 years that I was with Vasanwali School, overlapping the last 4 or 5 years with the Royal Academy and Vasanwali School, Mr. and Mrs. Puri, Arun Puri and Rekha Puri also were amazing in giving me the kind of space that was required to grow. And that's one of the most important things that we need to look at it. If we are to learn, how do we create that space? And sometimes we find ourselves constrained. And therefore, this whole thing about the making of a person of substance, the role of education and learning, is one of the main things, is how do you create space in this? But before going forward, if you notice, both the books have, the covers are quite amazing. And I want to thank the photographers so the Leading Out is a cover of a little kid grasping the thumbs of the grandfather. This is a photograph taken by Raghu Rai of his son and his father. And they also play, and I really thank him for allowing me to use this. And the Serene Strength, this is just such a wonderful, it's getting a mirror image coming across here. This is Akash Das, an amazing photographer whose photographs, quite a few of those I possess. And both these photographs are with me. So I wanted to thank all of them too, before I kind of get into this whole situation of the journey. So before writing Leading Out, I had written the other one, Transforming Schools, which is really looking, and that's having spent so many years actually being a teacher, and then becoming the head of getting involved in setting up of a school. So that Transforming Schools book is a fairly detailed, almost like a handbook to how to run a school. But then almost immediately after writing that, and I realized what was happening. I was traveling to Bhutan, I was traveling various places, Ritinjali, I was working in Tihar jail, I was working with the coolies at the INA market, I was working with students at Vasanwali School. There was this whole, then we worked in Gujarat after the earthquake, through Ritinjali, worked outside of Pondicherry after the tsunami. All these things were just, different people from different backgrounds, but all full of potential, right? And that's when I started thinking about what is it, that when I was working with, let's say, just to give a quick short example of the boys from the age of 16 to 21 in Tihar jail, I was working with coolies in the INA market from the similar socio-economic background. I had worked in the Doon school for a long time. I was working in Vasanwali school, and I was seeing what was it common amongst all these people, from different socio. So between the Tihar jail and the coolies in the INA market, there was, shall we say, the people there was one lot who were in conflict with the law, one lot who was not in conflict with the law, but both sets very keen. And what was for me became very important to understand that there was a lot of potential inside. And that's what I talk a lot about. How do you actualize your potential, right? The true purpose of education is that the first book that you talked about. How do you actualize your potential? And that potential is dynamic. It's not static. It keeps going as you grow, as your experiences come along. So the first book, Leading Out, was to put that thought down in many ways, right? That, hey, listen, for you to grow, and that's what you should do. You can't just be static. And that's where my kind of tussle with things like the IQ, the intelligent quotient, which was put across in 1919, and has, not been abandoned till now, where it gives you a number, you take a test, it gives you a number, and that number remains with you forever, right? It's just not correct. And I had met with Howard Gardner in a couple of the conferences when he talked about the intelligence, the multiple intelligence theory that he came up with, which had, many different intelligences. For me, those kind of conversations, experiences, talking to people, actually seeing them grow up, made me want to put down some of my thoughts. But also a little personal thing. When I was writing my book, we had just come back from Bhutan, my younger daughter, and unfortunately, she got cancer, and she was, not going down the right path. So I wanted to hurry up and give. So this book, dedicated to both my daughters, Ritika and Anjalika, through whom I began to see life after they had grown up a little bit. And I wanted to give the first copy of this leading out to Anjalika on her birthday, which I managed to do. So that was a book that was looking ahead and behind a little bit, seeing where all I had come. And then this book became the format, the 5 areas of development. I did a lot of talking about this, reading about it. As you can see, the foreword was written by His Majesty. So we were talking in terms of how do we actualize, if you're going to say that the human beings all have actual potential and they need to be actualized, then it was also true that the ideas have a life. And how do you actualize those ideas? And I was fortunate enough that I was given the space by His Majesty to set up the Royal Academy that you mentioned. It's up in Pawar. And we actually put into place a whole system based of learning and growing up for the children and the teachers, based on the 5 areas of development. And while we were doing this, while we were actualizing the potential of the idea, of course, it has grown a lot. We've learned a lot along the way. So we put together a bunch of teachers. We went to a training program. And simultaneously, I was also introducing this into the Vasant Valley School, where we also now function based on the 5 areas of development. And there's a whole system of roadmaps, indicators of success, which allows the children and the teachers to own their learning. Because that's the most important aspect that we need to understand. That in most places, the object of learning comes from outside somewhere. Somebody who's sitting in a ministry somewhere, or a body decides what's to be learned, and then it's thrown down. So that's the basic journey where we started off with putting out into the world the idea. This idea was picked up by Finland also, 100 in 2016. And this idea as an innovation has been looked at by Finland 2016, 2017, and they've just announced that they've also picked it up for 2021. So we're one of the few ideas of the 5 areas of development that have been acknowledged. And the actualization of this ideas of the 5 areas is where we read now. So what happens if you go down the journey of the 5 areas and you actualize your potential? Where should you be going? What should be happening? And that's where I started putting down some more thoughts about how do you actualize that potential. And that's what comes through in Serene Strength, where it was very obvious that no matter where you came from, no matter where you were, if you were growing and you're actualizing, it wasn't just good enough to be adequate and cope with stuff. You had to go towards the person of substance. For me, that phrase became very, very important. The making of a person of substance. And in this day and age of disruption and so many different ways of functioning, the importance of having more and more people of substance who think, not just for themselves, but for others, and who are aware of themselves and aware of their own weaknesses. And therefore, so that is the journey from understanding what the true purpose of education was, right? And I put down some ways of doing that, to saying that if you do follow that purpose, that understand that true purpose, then what do you do? And then the role of education and learning in making of a person of substance. And that phrase, serene strength, for me is again, you got to have strength, and this is coming from so many philosophers. Mahatma Gandhi said this, Nelson Mandela said, in many different ways. But that's the whole thing, that you are, just because you're serene, you're not weak. You still have the strength, but you don't have to kind of show your strength in ways to overpower people. And you need to understand that. So that's where the title Serene Strength comes from. And leading out came from the true meaning of education, to bring out. That was for me what leading out, where the term leading out comes from. It comes from the place that you have to lead out, bring out the best inside you. That's the true purpose of education, to educate, to bring out, to lead out. So I use the word lead out. That means you are involved in leading out what is inside you, not necessarily somebody else, but you need to take ownership of leading out. And then if you do lead it out, where you arrive, you become a person of substance, and you have this serene strength. And that is the kind of balancing act between these two books. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's
No,
where I'm coming from.